Okie dokie. And let's just do that. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to Jewish Small Communities Network Coffee Break. We do this every Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock. We've been doing it for like 2 years now, virtually non-stop. And it still keeps going strong, and there's still new faces who come in and become regulars, and we're mostly Jewish, but not everybody's Jewish, but everybody is definitely welcome. And we're welcoming as our special guest this morning Mike Levy, the author of this book, Get the Children Out, Unsung Heroes of the Kinderstransport. Mike is a researcher for the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, and also researches on behalf of the Association of Jewish Refugees. He's an educator with the Holocaust Education Trust and is chair of the Harwich Kinderstransport Memorial and Learning Trust. So good morning, Mike. You've got this book. Shall we actually put us on to Spotlight and put you onto Spotlight? There we go. And did this book come out of your natural predilection to being a researcher, or does it come from somewhere else?
It's a really good question, isn't it? Where do these things come from? I've been interested in the Kindertransport for, I say, about 20 years. I don't have any personal ties to it. I'm one of those British Jews whose grandparents, fled from the Tsars in the late 19th century. I don't have any German or Czech connections whatsoever. My interest really in the subject really began, I think, in the early 2000s when I joined a committee here in Cambridge, to organise this newfangled thing called Holocaust Memorial Day in 2001, I think it was. And the local city council who sponsored it wanted me to go and talk to local primary schools about the Holocaust. And of course, in those days, that wasn't done at all. So I thought, how can I introduce such a grim and but important subject to primary school children? I thought Kindertransport would be a good way in. And then I discovered, doing some research here in the University Library, fantastic library here in Cambridge, that there had been before the war and during the war, a local refugee committee set up to help the children once they were here. And that really sparked my interest really in who were the people who actually, first of all, got the children out of Germany and Austria and Czech, and to some very small extent to Poland, and what happened to them once they were here. Not from the kinder viewpoint, because that's been very well covered in a host of memoirs and books and studies, but it's kind of an area that hasn't been looked at in great depth. In other words, who were the people at the receiving end of the children? Who were the organisers at the UK end? So that's really. And then about 6 years ago, I decided to, at a very late stage in my life, I'm now officially, or I was officially called an extra mature student. That's actually, you're a super extra mature student if you're over 65. I was told that. Yeah, super extra mature. I've never been more mature in my life. And I started doing a PhD on the Cambridge Refugee Committee because its minutes and notes are more or less intact, which is amazing, and very rare, by the way. But when COVID struck and laziness also struck, I decided to give up the PhD and write a book instead, and a popular book that wouldn't be scholarly in its tone or, fantastically difficult to read. So that was the idea. That's where it came.
And where does your background come from? Is it as a researcher or is it from somewhere else?
My background really is two ways. For many, many years, nearly 20 years, I was a sixth form college teacher, history and economics. And then the last 25 years, I've been a freelance journalist. So the writing and the history teaching combined really in this century, we can now say, can't we, with Holocaust education. So it comes really from my interest and involvement in Holocaust education here in the UK.
Right. And has that involved you going into Europe and looking at the history there for yourself?
Well, I've been to, I was part of the Lessons from Auschwitz program run by the Holocaust Education Trust.
Tell us a bit about that. What is it?
Right. Well, it's a remarkable. I think it was a project set up by Gordon Brown in the around about 2000 and whenever 5, 6, and it's the idea of taking sixth form students to Auschwitz for a day, simply because that's the only way you can get large numbers of students around the UK and pay for it. So Holocaust Education Trust, when we could do it, take students to Auschwitz for a day with educators, and I was one of the educators that accompanied the children, and also specialists and VIP guests and so on. So Lessons from Auschwitz means that they have an orientation program with a survivor, well, sadly diminishing in number very rapidly, in London or wherever their schools happen to be around the country. Could be Belfast. I've done some in Inverness even. And then a rigorous day trip to Auschwitz, which means hiring, as they charter a plane to leave at 7 in the morning, get to Auschwitz gates at 11:30, stay there till 6, get back at midnight or 2 in the morning, whichever it might be. So I've done about 25 of those.
Oh gosh.
So I pretty much know Auschwitz now, like the back of my hand, really. And I'm also going to get in July, because I take an annual group from Gibraltar, oddly enough, who are on a similar kind of program.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Presumably, is that a Jewish group or a non-Jewish group?
Non-Jewish group.
Oh, right, okay. Because there is a distinct Jewish community in Gibraltar. So.
There is. I mean, we have usually say of 30 students, maybe 1 or 2 might be from the Jewish school, but most are not. So, right. And in fact, most of the ones on the Lessons from Auschwitz program are from non-Jewish schools around the country.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's all sixth formers all over the country, whatever, isn't it? Yeah, and of course,
each school in its region can nominate 2 sixth formers, and they go at a massively subsidised rates.
Yes. Well, in our shul last weekend, in fact, it wasn't on that particular one, because these students went on a 5-day trip, not a 1-day trip. Yeah. But we had 4 of them standing up and telling us about their experiences of having visited Poland, including Auschwitz. Yes. Yeah. So Mike, let's get onto your book. Get the children out. The Kinderstransport, very pertinent, given that we're all thinking about Ukrainian refugees and the apparent fight with the government, with the Home Office, about making it easy for refugees to come into this country. It's not necessarily been an easy task to get refugees into Great Britain, however welcoming and however grateful we are that they did come and still do come. So what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, obviously with any history, parallels are always a bit of a danger, because the context and the politics and the times are always very different. But there are some interesting near parallels, put it this way, in the sense that you had really from Kristallnacht, so-called, now more properly called the November Pogroms. I presume you all know what that is, or that was, which was the spark, in the way that the invasion of Ukraine is the spark of this refugee crisis, unprecedented since the end of the war. In the 1930s, of course, it was the rise of Hitler, and that began the flow of refugees into the UK, adults particularly. But it was only in 1938, with the annexation of Austria, the so-called Anschluss, in March 38, that the UK government, at the time of the greatest need for refugees, actually closed the doors. So from April 38 onwards, it became much more difficult for anyone really from Germany to get into the UK. They introduced, in fact, the first visa system that had been in place really, I think, since sometime just after the First World War. So there was certainly not an open-handed, let's take in as many refugees as we can policy from the UK government. Quite the reverse. As I say, up to March, April 38, it was really quite easy to get into Britain. You just had to persuade an immigration officer at the port that you had enough funds if you're going to stay for any length of time, and that you would be eventually going back. And as long as you made that declaration, you could come in without a visa. But it was only in April 38 that the visa system was introduced that really effectively shut the door on what we might call mass immigration. So there was certainly no asylum seeker policy in place in 38, and certainly after Kristallnacht in November 38, that visa system was well in place. So it was very, very difficult to get in. The only way that adults could get into the UK after 38 was if they had a job to go to in the UK, and that job had to be a job that was not going to threaten, as it were, domestic, job seekers, and therefore a very limited number of occupations were allowed. Primarily domestic service, mostly for women, but not entirely. There were some butlers and chauffeurs and people like that who got in from Vienna, say, or Berlin. And 20,000 women came on domestic visas, really from the Anschluss to the outbreak of war. So that's quite a remarkable number. And then, of course, we had this crisis in November 38, the so-called Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, which was the first very well organized mass pogrom against the Jews of Germany and Austria. It was not a spontaneous outburst of anger, as of course the propaganda said it was, but it was a very, very well organized assault on all things Jewish. And I think it became very clear from then on that the Jews were in mortal danger. I think it was the first time people realized that Hitler meant what he said in Mein Kampf, that the Jews were to be eliminated, exterminated. And although the death camps certainly hadn't arrived yet, and there was no such kind of final solution, so-called, in place, Auschwitz and all those camps that didn't really get going until 42, there was a sense that the Jews were in danger, maybe in danger of being starved to death, beaten to death, impoverished so that they couldn't live anymore. That was the kind of feeling. And the children particularly, of course, as now, were seen to be the ones in greatest need of help. And that's
indeed, it was only the children who in Kinderstransport were permitted to come in.
Yes, so basically, it's a complex story. You have to read the book, of course, to get the whole story. But basically, the government under the Home Office of Sir Samuel Hoare, a kind of decent chap, he was a Quaker or from a Quaker family, was persuaded by three things. He was persuaded by the delegation of Quakers under Bertha Bracey, who was in the book, who came back from Berlin as eyewitnesses to Kristallnacht, and they came back having travelled the length and breadth of Germany, quite remarkably, in November 38, almost every town and city, to report back on what the state of the Jews were in Germany, Austria. And they formed a very tight-knit group, both of German Quakers, who were very small in number, but British Quakers, who were much larger in number. And they formed a delegation to go and see Samuel Hoare, the Home Secretary, to urge him to at least allow the children in. There was still no, after the pogroms, there was still no opening of the gates, far from it. Alongside the Quaker delegation was a very high-powered Jewish delegation, led by Viscount Samuel, who had been the High Commissioner for Palestine in the 1920s and cabinet minister during the First World War, and one or two other high-powered Jewish representatives as well. So very high-powered delegation goes to Samuel Hoare on the 21st of November 1938, and that very evening Samuel Hoare announces to the House of Commons, very much like Michael Gover's done, at least an intention to allow children up to the age of 17, a little bit unclear as that meant 17 or below, or up to the last day they were 16, little bit unclear on that one.
Typical.
But, yes, but children up to the age of 17 would be allowed in on a temporary visa waiver scheme. That's what the Kindertransport was. It was a visa waiver scheme. In other words, the children didn't need a visa. They didn't need to queue up outside the passport office in Berlin or Vienna. And they could come in on a very light set of paperwork. But they were only here temporarily. So it was a temporary entry permit, essentially. And officially, in terms of bureaucracy, they were here for educational purposes. So they were here to learn English or whatever it might be. That was so they were certainly, officially not given a kind of asylum status. And that's because Britain was still trying to stay neutral, after Munich, not wanting to appease, not wanting to upset Hitler too much. But at the same time, giving way to not just this delegation, who were the tip of the iceberg, to a massive and very powerful lobby of ordinary folk up and down the country, actually led by not just the Chief Rabbi Hertz of the Chumash fame, but the Archbishop of Canterbury, Cosmo Lang, who broadcast on newsreels in every cinema in the country, saying we must help these children, we must raise money. And so there was a massive multi-faith outcry. The press, of course, the sympathetic press, the News Chronicle, the Times, actually, the Manchester Guardian, of course, the Jewish Chronicle, letters abounding in those newspapers urging the government to allow the children in. So really, that's how the process began, with a wave of outpour of sympathy to the Jewish children, particularly after Kristallnacht, and a mass movement really of volunteers, Jewish and non-Jewish, across the country, to get things organized, to get them out of Germany, first of all, not easy task, and into homes or hostels or holiday camps, wherever they could be found in the UK.
I didn't realize there was such a mass, outpouring of comment, across the faiths and the popular press, moving that. And I'd heard the story that it was very much down to particular people making approaches to the government. But that's amazing, because that's the sort of thing that we can relate to today, isn't it?
Well, I'll give you an example of that. In around about the 8th of December, 38, a public appeal went out under the name of Stanley Baldwin, who had been Prime Minister the year before, Chamberlain, who very well-known name. Whether he was loved or liked, I'm not sure, because of course he was involved in the abdication crisis, but he was a very well-known name. And he put his name to an appeal called the Baldwin Fund, which was to raise money to help pay for the children. Because I should say, by the way, that unlike the present government, which is some credit to them, the British government under Samuel Hoare and Chamberlain made it very clear that not a penny of taxpayers' money would be spent on these children, that every penny had to be raised through voluntary funds.
Yeah, and in fact, Barbara's just put in the chat that they had to be sponsored by for £50, so people had to raise money.
That was brought in a little bit later, when then not just the government, but the refugee agencies realised they were going to be running out of money very quickly, and that some kind of halt had to be put on to what was really a mass movement of children initially in the first few weeks of Kindertransport, which dwindled down to a trickle very quickly, because the money was starting to run out. Even with the Baldwin Fund raised £500,000 in 1938-39. That's equivalent about 30 million at today's prices, but it was still not enough to pay for thousands and thousands of children to come here, for an extended time. And you're quite right. I mean, there was a call to introduce a £50 deposit, which was a lot of money. Remember, the average weekly wage was £4 a week. So £50 is 12 times the average weekly wage. You can imagine the equivalent of that today. And that had to be deposited with the refugee agencies. And the idea there was that was not to pay for the children while they were here, but to put down a deposit on the amount of money needed when they went, when they left for a third country. Remember, they were all due in as transmigrants. So it's kind of fiction that it would go to some third country eventually, not Britain, but possibly one of the dominions. Having said that, nearly all the dominions, like Australia and Canada, said no thanks, we're not taking these children. So for a brief time, again, it's all in my book, there was a £50 deposit required. It was quickly dropped again with a lot of outcry from the refugee agencies and volunteers right across the country. Now, you'll notice also, by the way, Ed, that I haven't mentioned the one name that people associate with Kindertransport Rescue.
Well, go on, mention him.
Nicholas Winton. So
Sorry, I think we lost that.
So Nicholas Winton.
Yes.
God bless him. Associated really from the late 80s with the Kindertransport program, and he's memorialized and celebrated. When he died at the age of 106, there was much outpouring of sympathy for his family and so on. And he did, in fact, an amazing amount of work. But as I say in the book, first of all, he had no input whatsoever with the German-Austrian Kinder. He was only involved in the Czech Kinder from March 38 onwards, really. Some in January, but mostly from March 39 onwards. He managed to rescue with his team 669 children from Prague, but who, I say in the book, who rescued the other 9,000 who came from Germany and Austria, because he wasn't at all involved in any way with the German-Austria Kindertransport.
And so we come to your subtitle of the book, which is The Unsung Heroes of the Kindertransport. Exactly. Can I just say at this point, we do have, your publishers have very generously given us an extra copy, and we're going to make that available to the winner of a prize draw. The way you get your name onto the prize draw is we are going to collect donations to help the World Jewish Relief Ukraine appeal. So if you want to donate to that, your donation will go via us to World Jewish Relief, and anybody who's entered it, we'll put all your names in a hat and we'll announce over the next week. We're just giving a window of 1 day, so you have to do it. Don't think about it, just do it. I've put a link in the chat, or you can just go on the website and go to our Coffee Break page. There is a donation button on there, anything from £6 up, because we're going to have to post this to you, so you're going to get it quite cheap anyway. Anything from £6 up to £600 if you want, but we've suggested a smaller amount of so that's that. Please do it. You can do it whilst you're listening, but Mike, tell us about these unsung heroes apart from Nicholas Winton.
Well, I think Nicholas was, and I knew him quite well, and he would be the first to say I was part of a much bigger team. Even the Czech rescue, for instance, involved people like Trevor Chadwick and Doreen Warriner and Beatrice Wellington. I don't know whether these names ring any bells, but probably not. And these were the people who were actually in Prague negotiating with the Nazis after March 38-9. And organizing the trains. Winton's job essentially was to find homes for the children once they were here. That was part of his work, was at the UK end, finding foster families for the children. So even in his world of the Prague children, there was a group of volunteers. I'm not sure any of them were Jewish. No, they weren't. Some Quakers like Jean Hall, a cousin of Samuel Hall, the Home Secretary. There was a very important, significant Jewish person, Maria Schmulker, who was a Prague Jewish woman living and always have lived in Prague. She was involved in the Kindertransport end, but then she was a kind of a Czech national. So even in the kind of Czech part of the story, there are many, many people who are involved that generally haven't been remembered. And as you say, Ed, I subtitled my book is Unsung Heroes of the Kindertransport. Perhaps if I could share my part of my PowerPoint, I can show you some of the unsung heroes. So let's have a little look at this. You'll probably see you probably see my book again. It's sort of shamelessly plugging the cover.
Yeah.
I'm going to, because I normally give an hour's talk, and so there are about 35 slides here. So I'm going to whiz through the ones that you've asked me about. Oh, it's not moving. Let's wait. No. This sometimes happens. It doesn't move on. There we go. I'll come back to that in a moment. There's Nicholas Winton, the sung hero, I think we would say, of the Kindertransport. I'm not saying he's by any means a hero, but I think he's part of the story. So Samuel Hall, the Home Secretary at the time, who announced, by the way, it was not a parliamentary vote on the Kindertransport. He announced to Parliament, like Gove did, that this is what is going to happen, that children will be allowed in. They could discuss it, but there was no chance for any MPs to vote against the Kindertransport. It was a special motion to the House. So, you know, whether you want to call him a hero or not is questionable, but certainly without Hall's say so. I mean, for instance, give an example. When Chamberlain, the Prime Minister, was asked about the Kindertransport, he said, "That's nothing to do with me, ask the Home Secretary." So it was very much the Home Secretary's decision to allow the children in. And I think he deserved some kind of acknowledgement, even though there were all sorts of caveats around the arrival of the children. So let's move on. Sorry about this. There's Stanley Baldwin, who set up the Earl Stanley Baldwin Fund that raised the £500,000. And he knew, I think, or people around him knew, that with a name like his, it would give the fundraising appeal a sort of legitimacy and weight. He was a very, very well-known figure, quite popular with many sections of the British society, and it was a man who had gone to the House of Lords, didn't have that much to do, and so it was good that he gave his name to the appeal, which was a nationwide appeal all the way through the country, from Jolly Groats to Land's End, and Northern Ireland as well. Moving on. So let's have a look at some of the rescuers that appear in the book. I'm going to start with this lady, Gertrude Weissmuller-Meyer, not British, but a Dutch rescuer, who is pictured here in the 1960s next to a bust that was made of her on the occasion of her becoming one of the earliest righteous among the Gentiles at Yad Vashem. Now, I've written a chapter on her, but you could easily write a whole book about her work in helping, first of all, hide Jewish children in the Netherlands, and particularly when, after the occupation, when that was a very dangerous thing to do. She was a member of the Dutch underground, Dutch resistance, had been a social worker, Christian lady, by the way, and she became a go-between between the London volunteers and the Nazis. No one really dared to go and negotiate with the head of the Austrian emigration department, so-called Jewish emigration department. Who was this man? That face may be familiar. That is Adolf Eichmann. Adolf Eichmann, of course, who was the architect of one of the architects anyway, the final solution of mass murder of Jews, and of course arrested by the Israelis in the early 60s. But in 1938, he was head of the Vienna-based Jewish emigration department, and you had to have his say-so to allow the children to leave. So in a long, complex story involving Gertrude being arrested as a spy, she talks her way out of Vienna prison. She demands to see Eichmann, who allows her to come in. Eichmann tries to humiliate her by saying, you know, what kind of Aryan are you who wants to help Jews? And she stands her ground. She's not intimidated in the least. And within 5 days, I'm going to say this slowly because even when I say it, it's hard to imagine. She organizes the first Kindertransport from Vienna of 600 children on one train in 5 days, and didn't do it on her own. She worked with the Jewish agency in Vienna, but she was the one liaising with London, liaising with Amsterdam, with Berlin, to get the children out on this new no visa waiver scheme. It was the largest single Kindertransport of the whole period. Just to give you some context, Nicholas Winton, over several months, got out 669 children, and she gets 600 out on the very first Kindertransport. And I felt, you know, this lady needs to be remembered. She went on to organize many, many other transports, particularly one from Vienna. And if your grandparents, great-grandparents came as a kinder from Vienna, Gertrude would have had some role to play in that. I'm very pleased to say, by the way, that a new documentary film has just been made by a Dutch Jewish director called Truce's Children. And I think it was shown at the Jewish Film Festival this year, in the last few months ago.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not to say that she's unsung. She's beginning to be sung, which is I'm delighted about. I think completely unsung probably is Helen Bentwich, member of the Bentwich. She married Norman Bentwich, who'd been Attorney General to Palestine under Viscount Samuel. She was a member of the well-known Anglo-Jewish Franklin family, which includes Rosalind Franklin, you know, the physicist. But in the 1930s, Helen was the chair of the London County Council Education Committee. That's why she's got that chain around her neck. And she was the one who set up the UK, the main UK Refugee Committee based in London. She is really responsible for the UK end of the Kinder once they'd arrived here. Also liaising with German counterparts and with Gertrude Weissmuller-Meyer as well, and so on. But the most remarkable thing about Helen, I think, is the way is her committee. This is the committee that she put together within a few days of Kristallnacht, maybe a few weeks. Mostly women, mostly names that won't mean too much to you, but, you know, kind of mighty names in their day. Lola Hahn-Warburg from the Warburg banking family, herself a German exile, had incredible contacts all the way through Germany, you know, with the Jewish communities and Jewish community leaders in Germany. Elaine Blond, who was the sister of Simon Marx from the Marks and Spencer family, tireless, very aristocratic lady, but someone that you did not say no to. Any trouble with the Home Office, they would send Elaine Blond in to sort them out. Stella Isaacs, Lady Reading, who became who founded the Women's Voluntary Service, the WVS, another formidable lady, and Rebecca Seith, also from the Marks and Spencer family, Marx family, all under the aegis of Helen Bentwich, known as Mamie, and all ladies who were very, very much involved, particularly in the German-Austrian Kindertransport rescue. This is Bertha Bracey, who was the head of the British Quakers. She led the delegation to see Samuel Hoare, having organized her fact-finding missions around the whole of Germany after Kristallnacht. And you probably know that the Quakers played a huge role in the care of the children once they were here.
Indeed.
And that comes down, I think, to Bertha Bracey, who set up schools, cajoled Quaker boarding schools to take in children, cajoled Quaker meetings across the country to open their doors as foster homes, and went on after the war. Did any of you see Windermere Children, about the rescue of children after the war?
Yes.
Windermere?
Yes.
One of the most important figures not shown in the film was Bertha Bracey, who was the kind of, along with Leonard Montefiore, was the brains behind the rescue of those Windermere children. So an incredibly important figure, you know, tragically unknown in this, you know, but hopefully will help to put it back on the map. Wilfred Israel, who was the equivalent of the owner of Harrods in Berlin, Jewish store called Israel and Co. And N Israel, I think, and Co. was the proper name of it. And he had a British passport, which gave him a certain amount of flexibility to move in Berlin, even under the gaze of the Nazis. He was a leader of at least 2 major Jewish agencies in Berlin. I'm not a German speaker, but Reichsvertretung der Juden in Deutschland and the Hilfsverein. These were Germans, Jewish self-help groups, fantastically under the cosh of the Nazis, you know, constantly being harassed, arrested, put in concentration camps. But Israel somehow managed to stay out of the camps because of his British passport, and also because his department store was the place where the Nazis also did their Christmas shopping. I'm not saying that in a light-hearted way. That was one of the reasons why his store was not demolished, set fire to in Kristallnacht. And he put together an equivalent team of amazing ladies, particularly in Berlin, such as Kate Rosenheim, who was the head of the Children's Emigration Department in Berlin. It's thought that she got over 7,000 children out from Nazi Germany, not just to Britain, but to Palestine, America, and other countries of haven. And this lady, Hannah Kaminski, who was a League of Jewish Women that had offices, committees, if you like, all the way through Germany. And so if your grandparents lived in Mannheim and wanting to get your grandmother out as a 7-year-old child, they would probably first have gone to their local League of Jewish Women office, and they would have done the paperwork, negotiated with the Nazis for all the exit bits of paper they needed, and so on. Hannah also, we don't have records, but she went on a innumerable number of trips with the children as a chaperone. She held the hands of the smallest children, brought them over, and every time refused to stay in the UK, once saying, I need to go back for more. So if ever there was an unsung hero, it's Hannah Kaminski, and you can see from her date of death that always that chilling 1942 year, which means, and probably it does in this case, that she was a victim of the Holocaust, murdered at Auschwitz. And although his name not totally forgotten, there was a Kaminski home, I think, or room somewhere in London, but generally not known for the work that she did. And then finally, I'm just going to mention one of my favorite unsung heroes, Dr. Rabbi Solomon Schonfeld, who was born in London, 1912, ultra-Orthodox by today's, he would be called, I think, and essentially obsessed with getting Orthodox children and their parents and yeshiva students and Orthodox rabbis out, particularly out of Vienna. He was not one to want to work with Helen Bentwich and her committee. He was very much, I say in the book, a one-man Kinderstransport who organised his own trains, his own battling with the Home Office. But actually, the Home Office loved him. They thought he was a gentleman. He was 6'2", I think, blue eyes, cricketer, loved Gilbert and Sullivan, and yet was a ultra-Orthodox rabbi, with an impeccable English accent. And so he was very much, oh, and by the way, I should say, son-in-law of Chief Rabbi Hertz. So pretty well connected in that world. He's the epitome, as I say in the book, of Jewish chutzpah, because he tried every trick in the book to get not just the children out, but their parents, which was unusual, and their teachers and rabbis, as I say, and yeshiva students. I'll give you one example of his chutzpah. He went to the Home Office in, I think it was early 1939, saying that he needed 250 visas. They told him, well, of course, Rabbi, we can only give visas to people who are coming to do work, and work that can't be done by British people. And he said, well, that's not a problem, because we have a terrible shortage in Britain of tzitzit knotters, people who knot the fringes on tzitzit and on the talit. Well, of course, the Home Office knew no better. They said, well, that sounds plausible. And they issued him more or less then and there. I think he stayed up all night to have 200 visas created for Austrian professional tzitzit knotters who were on the next train or train after to London, and their lives and their families' lives were saved. No one's done a real calculation of how many people he did save. We think maybe 700 children and possibly 2,000 plus Orthodox adults from Vienna and Berlin. One final thing about Schonfeld is one of my favorite figures in the book. He seems to be in military costume. Can you see that? He's got a cap.
Yeah.
You look very closely, the cap has a Magen David on it, Star of David. And that is because he's General Schonfeld of his own army. He had his costume made. He's not in the army, in fact. And the idea was that if he looked like a military, senior military figure, it would open a lot more doors in continental Europe than just arriving as a British rabbi. And so he, why not, made himself into a Jewish officer. Actually, most of the work he did with this uniform was done after the war in saving children who survived the camps or were in convents and orphanages in Poland, and he thought they should be reconnected with their Jewish culture. So again, another remarkable figure. I think a film should be made about him, never mind a book, because I've only given you a fraction of the incredible exploits and chutzpahdik things that he did, including, for instance, buying a Caribbean island to save Jews. I'm not going to tell you any more about that. I'll leave you intrigued by that story. So there are just some of the unsung heroes. I think I cover about 25 in total, but that's giving you a taste.
Right, that's absolutely amazing. And having been to the Caribbean a couple of years ago, I'm now intrigued. And your book only arrived yesterday, so I've not had a chance to actually do anything more than flick the leaves of it. Thank you so much. Shall we open up to questions? I'm sure people are actually burning to ask. Let me see. Elise says, I'll read this out. Or indeed, Elise, do you want to unmute and ask your own question?
Okay, yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we'll
Great.
put it onto gallery view, then you can see.
Fab, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for your talk. It was really interesting. I was just wondering if there was someone trying to find out the experiences of a specific kinder, where would you approach, or where would you suggest that they approach, or who, or does it sort of vary depending on when they came and where?
You're talking about someone in your family, presumably.
Yes,
well,
yeah. If you're looking for a specific person, yeah.
The trouble is that there are a lot of the records of the kinder were destroyed by the refugee agencies, fearing that if, say, Britain should be invaded in 1940, why have records? Having said that, there is one major source that you should try, and that's with World Jewish Relief, WJR. They have a digitized set of archives, including, I think, 35,000 record cards. And if don't have to be that lucky, but if you're slightly lucky, then that relative will be on their database. They have a team of archivists who, for free, will check to see whether they've got a record of your relative. And if they have, will generously send you digitized copies of whatever records they might have, which could be, for instance, those Kinderstransport entry papers, might be a passport if they had one. If you're very lucky, it might have correspondence and records of the refugee committees keeping tabs, as they did do, on each child. There'll be a kind of running commentary on the child's progress through the war period. So luckily, by sheer fluke, those records survived. They were forgotten about and hidden in a set of filing cabinets for about 40 years and discovered in the 80s. So they've recently all been digitized, and that's your best hope.
Great,
Unless your ancestor, your relative, went to a town whose refugee records have survived, but they're few and far between. I can tell you privately later where they might be.
That would be great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And we've got Peter's got his hand up. So Peter, do you want to unmute and ask?
Yeah, thank you. thank you, Ed, and thank you, Mike, for a fascinating talk. It's amazing how we can find out more all the time about this. I mean, I just wanted to, it's funny that the previous question, I put my hand up before the previous question was raised, but I wanted to comment on that because those records are fantastic. And I only in the past year got the record of my father's entry card. He came from Vienna, and only in the past year did I get through, thanks to Debbie Cantor. She's a good person to contact there, Debbie Cantor, and they've done an incredible job of putting these, digitizing these. And I was sent the sort of record card for my father's arrival, and it's interesting. I just pulled that up now, and it does have his visa number on it, and he was granted. He was actually 18 when he arrived, so I think he was just above the Kinderstransport, but he arrived in February 39, and it says on his record, it's handwritten in there by the clerk, visa granted 28/1/39, and will emigrate to Palestine on completion of training at the David Eden farm. But he never did go to there. Clearly he stayed, as most people did, even though they had these transit visas. And it is so interesting just to go back to these records. We found another record of a cousin of my father, who went on to become an economics professor at Sheffield University. And when we've just found his entry records, he was younger. He only came at about age 14. So there's a wonderful source of records.
It is hit and miss. I mean, I don't like to raise people's expectations, because I have a lot of examples where people say there's nothing there, or there's just one name, it's just one single bit of information. So it's worth, don't go with too high hopes. No. But Peter's obviously hit the jackpot with his records. It's very, very hit and miss. There is, by the way, if anyone's got the spare 100,000 quid or thereabouts, I'm sure, looking around, there's many of you in that. There is a really great job to be done at WJR Records, and that is to go through all 35,000 records and pick out which of them are Kindertransport, and sub-analyze them in that way. And then we would have the only fully fledged record of Kindertransport names in one place, because those 35,000, as in Peter's case, also include many refugees who came not on the Kindertransport. For instance, if was it your father?
Yes, yes.
If he had a visa, it means he probably wasn't a Kindertransport, and as you say, he was too old. So many of them are older refugees, but it just needs filleting out. But I asked them about this. They said it would take a researcher at least 18 months to do that. So maybe more.
Yeah, they do.
That is a job, I think, that still needs to be done. That's the intriguing thing about this world, is there are still, great things still to be done. I'll give you another example, is that there's a huge Kindertransport archive in Vienna that it seems like very few people have looked at. If it were not for COVID, I would have gone myself, but it's only just reopened. It's at the Simon Wiesenthal Center. So if anyone's got lots of spare time, and it might be useful to be able to read German, the records of the Vienna Refugee Committee have been pretty much untouched, and they're sitting there in Vienna. Come on, somebody do it.
So there's a heritage project that if somebody wants to put in a bid to the Heritage Lottery Fund, there's that sounds like a potential there, I think. And we've got a question from John Levermore, or his ironing board, whichever. Yeah.
Yes, I've been listening intently. I have a comment, perhaps you may agree or disagree, but there doesn't seem to be much of a change in either the Foreign Office or the Home Office in the last 80 years. The attitude to refugees seems to be untouched.
Well, that does seem, there are so many parallels, as you say. I think that there have been exceptions to that rule. This is not my area, as it were, so I'm not so sure whether this is true. But I think with the Ugandan nations, I don't think they needed visas to come. I think the doors were open, and certainly I think it's not the case for the Hong Kong. Anyone from with a British passport, they've already got British passports, of course. So there may be some exceptions to that rule. But yes, I think Britain is one of the I won't say one of the few countries, but certainly Britain has always tied refugee status to visa status, and that's where nothing's changed very much. I mean, in this new Ukraine at home, you know, they're going to have visas and fill out a visa application form, which is not exactly asylum-seeking policy. So yes, the Foreign Office and the Home Office have always been barriers to refugees rather than you know, people want to encourage them. So
Yeah,
that's certainly true.
but Victoria is saying that the Czech refugees in '68 were allowed in.
Right.
And let me see, the Marie is asking, what archives did you use to actually research all these unsung heroes, or where did you find the information?
Well, a variety of places. I mean, in some cases, I started with you know, any living relatives that I could find. That, for instance, I spoke to Jeremy Schoenfeld, Rabbi Schoenfeld's son, who sent me some wonderful photographs and documents, and that sends you on a trail to possibly National Archive in Kew or the London Metropolitan Archive in Islington. Some of the museums have got archives, so it depends on, you know, there's no one place that you can go to where it should all happen. By the way, one of my other dreams is there will be one day one place where all Kindertransport archives and histories can be found, because it's such an important part of our history, but there isn't at the moment. In the case of Alan Sainsbury, who is in my book, Alan Sainsbury, I didn't mention him, but he had a remarkable part to play in the Kindertransport. I went to the Sainsbury family and said, have you got any information about your grandfather who took in set up a Jewish hostel in South London? And in that case, he didn't. So it was a bit of a blank. So you had to kind of think out the box, really, where might these be? And I did that one through finding former Kinder who lived at the hostel and had written memoirs about their time there. So I had to get it that way around. So sometimes through the Kinder themselves, sometimes through relatives. If you're lucky, there might be a obscure book written about the person, you know, 60 years ago when they died. Lennon Montefiore, for instance, who played a remarkable role in the Windermere Children. The only book that's been written about him was on the occasion of his 80th birthday, I think. Excuse me. So yeah, a variety of sources. You've just got to be fleet-footed and think outside the box, essentially, because, you know, there's no one place you can go to. University Library here in Cambridge, it's like the British Library, so it's got virtually every book that's ever been published. So that's a very good source as well. And also, by the way, I should say, and I recommend this to everybody, fantastic resource is British Newspaper Archive. So you can go back and do searches on newspapers from the past, you know, put in a keyword like Helen Bentwich and see if she comes up, you know, an article written in the 30s or a letter from her, which they were, in fact, I found. So that's another great source. And
Ruth is asking, are there any specific people? So I think she's referring to World Jewish Relief that you said it's worth asking. Is there a particular route in to ask questions about this archive that you mentioned?
In World Jewish Relief?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you go onto their website, Google World Jewish Relief and just email them. There'll be an email contact on there, and say that you're looking, you know, you want to contact their archivist, Debbie Cantor, who leads a team of archivists. She's not the only one. And they'll get back to you. They're really good. They're brilliant. They do a wonderful job, really. Set of volunteers doing this without payment, you know, to help people find their history.
We've just got a couple of minutes left. Has anybody else got a question? If you want to put your virtual or your actual hand up. Robert, you need to unmute. Robert, we can't hear you. There
Oh,
we go.
have I got it?
Yeah.
I don't know what it's doing now. But just one question, and it's not quite related to the Kindertransport. I noticed your surname was Stern.
Was what, sorry?
I noticed your surname is Stern.
Not my surname, no, it's Levy.
No. Oh, so right. Sorry, I got the wrong person then. Sorry.
I believe my name is a Jewish name. I'm not sure. Is that right, Levy? I'm told
Oh, it is, and who am I thinking of? Sorry. It's all right, ignore me. Sorry.
Okay, does anybody else want to make a comment or have a question?
Actually, you know, I always like to make a comment.
Go on, Nikki.
Basically, I mean, I look into my family history a lot, because it's so diverse and amazing. For you, how do you really sort of start that development? For me, I literally have a bed full of just papers everywhere and a lounge full of, I'm literally sat by my piano, because there's just so much paperwork everywhere, because I feel this need to know where I come from. And I kind of do know where I come from on both sides, clearly. But at the same time, I'm also sort of like, yeah, but what about that grandparent and that great grandparent and all of this? And how do you research? Because for me, I kind of do it all by myself. And there's so many wonderful things you can do on the internet. And I'm so lucky that both sides of my family have like Torahs and things that they've put everyone's family names in and everything since like 1880, something like that. So, but like, how do you go?
Yeah. It's a good question. I think this is genealogy you're talking about now, looking into your own family.
Yeah. But also, like, I'm writing a book at the moment. It's kind of a novel, but it's kind of based on family history.
Right.
So, like, it's going okay.
Let me take you. Sorry to interrupt, because I know we're running out of time. I think probably the best thing I can suggest, although again it's not my area particularly, is there is a Jewish Genealogy Society. Am I right? I think that's right.
Yes, yeah, you can find them on Facebook. Yeah,
they have a website, they have a Facebook, and they will have all the information about records, how to access them, and so on. I would say, just from I've never done the genealogy of my family, for instance, but I imagine it's good to start with a very specific question. Otherwise, your brain will be going in all sorts of directions. So if you know a great grandfather or grandfather, or grandmother, what can you know more about them? Where can I find out about where they lived, what occupation they did? But I'm sure the Jewish Genealogy Society will be really helpful, and they've probably got all sorts of methods and contacts already in place. But as I say, it's not really. I've got a funny thing about genealogy. I'm not that interested in what my great-grandfather did. I'm much more interested in what other people's great-grandfathers did. It's strange, isn't it? Maybe I need some kind of counselling on that one.
I think one reason is perhaps that it's a lot easier to look objectively at organising all this information when it is somebody else. When it's your own family, and from my personal experience, I accumulated, for one reason or another, lots of documentary evidence of around my family, and I couldn't see the wood for the trees.
That's the thing.
Because it was, you assume you know things, and actually you don't, and then you look at it again 5 years later and you go, how did you miss that?
Yes.
But I think looking at somebody else's, you're probably clearer.
I think genealogy can become quite obsessional, which is maybe one reason why I don't want to do it. But you reminded me that I did some research on my wife's Jewish family and discovered a most amazing thing, that her cousin, a long lost, forgotten cousin, was a partisan in the forests, Jewish partisan in the forests of what's now Belarus.
Oh my goodness.
And it is something I'm going to write about maybe next but one or something, because it is a remarkable, first of all, it's interesting in the way that the facts came to me. It's like sometimes history is knocking at your door, not the other way around, you know, and things that you couldn't ever have predicted, you know, coincidences, you know, meeting an old man who said, yes, I knew that man. I was also in the forest with him. That happened to me. Yes, we were friends in the forest, you know, and I'm the last surviving member of his troop. That kind of thing that just came out of the blue. So, you know, you never know. Let history come to you is what I would say. Let it knock on your door rather than the way around. That sounds a bit spiritual, which is not like me. But I do think sometimes the past does sometimes want you to find it, and not the other way around. I think with that, Ed, we better say,
I think that is a good way to round it up. Just before we go, Peter is endorsing that World Jewish Relief is a good way to support the Ukraine appeal at the moment and refugees. You can do that and win a copy of Mike's book by making your donation via the page, our coffee break page on the JSCN website. You can do that and make all your other donations and volunteer yourself to house a refugee as well. No doubt we'll be publishing some information on that. You can do it now. It's quite straightforward. Go on the government website and just Google it. Go on World Jewish Relief website, actually, and they also tell you how to do it. You have to register on both World Jewish Relief and the government website, and basically you are putting your interest forward on how to do that. If there's any other questions coming in, we'll probably answer them. I can maybe pass them through to Mike if you've got those, if that's all right, Mike.
Yeah, of course. Yes, yeah, happy to do that.
But I'm sorry to cut Peter off, but we'll run out of time. And just to thank you all for coming today. If you are watching this on catch up on our YouTube channel, then it's probably too late to make your donation through the website to win the prize, but you can still make the donation. We're going to have a cut-off time for actually winning the prize, but you can still donate. So thank you to everybody for coming today. We're going to have another great meeting next week. We've got some authors lined up in the months to come. And Mike, thank you once again. You've really got to read the book. My appetite has not just been whetted, but I'm desperate to read that.
The publisher's always telling me to say it's available on Amazon.
It's available on Amazon.
Yes, indeed.
And we can get this one copy out to you quickly as well when you win it.
All right, lovely.
Purim Sameach, have a happy Purim to everybody here. The message of Purim, by the way, is standing up and being counted like Queen Esther. Stand up and be counted. Make your donations, offer a home to a refugee. Make sure that you understand the history of what has happened to our people as well by going out, reading it and talking about it to other people. That's the way that heritage stays alive. Till next week, it's lovely to have you all. I'll see you again soon.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, hang on. Where's that gone?